Greetings, fellow adventurers. I'm Max with PEAK D&D.
And I'm Ben. Welcome to the Peak.
We're here in the Rocky Mountains helping you elevate your game in 5th edition's Dungeons & Dragons and possibly life.
Welcome to Peaked Interests. Today we're talking about what to expect when you sit down to play Dungeons & Dragons for the first time ever.
Yeah, so let's roll some initiative and get to it.
Like I said, Max and I are going to talk to you about what to expect when you sit down for your first ever game of Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah, we're starting at the very beginning. I'm talking like you've only ever heard of the game, you've never played, never watched anyone else play, and maybe have no idea what an RPG is or what those letters mean.
There are people out there like that?
There are.
I don't know.
And this video is for them and anyone who's a little curious.
Shh, don't worry. We won't say anything.
Dungeons & Dragons is a game of collaborative storytelling.
It's basically one giant choose-your-own-adventure book. Now, if you're old like us, you might know what that means.
Only instead of being the only person on the hook for making those choices that dictate the direction of the story, you're one of a few main characters.
And instead of the story being written down in book form and having to flip to page 64 or 17, depending on whether or not you open the back door of the spooky house or go in the front, it's spoken aloud by the Dungeon Master.
The Dungeon Master is the storyteller. You and everyone else around the table are main characters.
Hence the collaborative nature of Dungeons & Dragons. Everyone, the Dungeon Master included, and all the players are all on the same team. There are no winners, there are no losers. It's about spending time with people you like, exercising your imagination, and having as much fun as you can, making up a giant sweeping story together. That's Dungeons & Dragons.
And as the name implies, and you probably know because you don't live under a rock, it's a game of fantasy. There's magic and treasure and heroes and villains and fairies and gods and, yes, dungeons and dragons.
It's sort of like you've been plopped down in the middle of a big old fairy tale. Lords and ladies, castles and caverns, monsters, mayhem, politics, you name it. It's all here or there, depending on the Dungeon Master and the story that they're telling.
That's the backdrop. If you're going to play Dungeons & Dragons, you're signing up to step into a world of fantasy and use your imagination to participate in a collaborative storytelling experience with other people.
Which, incidentally, looks a lot like a group of people sitting down around a table that's covered in books.
Or devices.
Dice and paper, possibly snacks, preferably snacks, with a giant map in the middle.
The books or devices are where you find the rules. The pieces of paper are information about each of your characters and any notes you may have taken about the story thus far. And the dice are the physical embodiment of chance.
There will be one person at the table who's sitting behind a screen of some sort. They are the Dungeon Master. They're the one who's going to set the scene and start telling the story.
Everyone else controls their character. They get to choose their actions and reactions, and the dice determine if those actions and reactions work spectacularly, fail horribly, or land anywhere in between.
And that is D&D in a nutshell. One person has control over everything but the players, and everyone else is a player and only has control over their own actions. You collaborate, work together, have fun, and create a story.
Now that you have a broad strokes watercolor picture of what Dungeons & Dragons is like, Ben and I are going to zoom in a bit and bust out the acrylics.
There are two different phases in the game of Dungeons & Dragons: combat and non-combat.
You're either fighting monsters and bad guys, or you're exploring the world and talking to people in order to fight monsters and bad guys.
We're going to start with combat because that's where the action is.
Yeah, Ben's right. Combat is literally made up of actions. Each character or bad guy has 4 different ones they can do. They can move, perform an action, take a bonus action, and if circumstances allow, a reaction.
Now, movement is pretty self-explanatory. Every time it's your turn, you get to move a certain number of spaces on the map. and you also get to perform an action.
Usually this action is going to be attacking an enemy, casting a spell, or using a magic item and possibly interacting with your environment in some way.
You'll also have the ability to take a bonus action. Now, these aren't as cut and dry as regular actions. They're mostly dependent on the type of character that you're playing.
And reactions are responses that are triggered by certain conditions in the game. You're allowed to take one of these each round whenever those conditions are met, and even if it's not on your turn.
A round is what it's called when each player and each enemy have taken their turn. They've moved, acted, taken bonus actions, etc.
In terms of the story, each round of combat takes 6 seconds. So, say combat starts and your character notices a clock on the wall that reads 5:45, everyone will get to take 10 turns in the time it takes for that clock to tick to 5:46.
And in terms of real life, a single round can last upwards of half an hour, depending on how many players are there and what's going on.
Combat is over when all the bad guys are captured or dead, or when you and your friends are. Then it's on to the other phase of Dungeons & Dragons, exploration and social interaction.
See, not every square inch of the Dungeon Master's or DM's world is likely to be full of enemies to fight. There are also people just living their lives. Farmers farming, blacksmiths smithing, kings kinging.
There are cities and settlements, towns and villages, kingdoms, nations, mountains, forests, deserts, legends, ruins, and possibly other planes of existence to explore.
So you've got some choices to make. Are you and your friends going to save the princess, serve the gods, help the peasants, and whatever you decide to do, it all comes down to this.
And this. How creative can you be imagining solutions to help you achieve your goal, given the circumstances you find yourself in?
Anytime you do anything other than walk around, and sometimes even then, you'll have to roll a die. The number you get, plus or minus some modifiers, determines if you succeed or fail.
That's the game. That's Dungeons & Dragons. It's a group of people sitting around a table, rolling dice with a bunch of books and paper everywhere.
The one person sitting behind the screens is in charge. They're the Dungeon Master, the storyteller, the referee. It's their world. You and everyone else around the table, they're just living in it.
It's up to you, the players, to explore that world. Talk to the people you find, learn what's happening, and figure out how you want to participate and likely shape the events. This means paying attention to the Dungeon Master when they speak and following leads.
And there's sure to be fights along the way. When one of these happens, time sort of slows down and everyone rolls what's called initiative to determine who gets to go first, second, third, and so on during the rounds of combat.
When it's your turn, you get to move, act, bonus act, and possibly react, doing your best to stay alive, keep your friends alive, and vanquish the foes.
That's it. Exploring the world your Dungeon Master has made. Traveling places, meeting different people, getting into trouble, and when the time comes, taking up arms against that trouble, using the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, i.e. the dice.
When you're successful, you gain experience. Usually this is a lump sum awarded at the beginning or end of a game session. When you tally enough experience, you gain a level and become more powerful.
So you can fight stronger enemies, gain more experience to gain more levels to fight stronger enemies.
Until you get to the final chapter of the story where you're saving the world or the kingdom or doing something awesome.
Yeah, but instead of just sitting back and passively watching the hero's story unfold in the movie or the book, you get to participate and be that hero with your friends.
You'll learn about group dynamics, teamwork, decision-making, strategic thinking, cooperation, and a whole lot more. Not to mention, give your whole imagination and creativity a good workout.
So if being a hero, being creative, building your imagination, collaborating, being social, telling a giant sweeping story that can last months or even years with your friends is something that you'd be into, well, that's what Dungeons & Dragons is all about.
And for what that actually looks like in the real world, it's just a bunch of people sitting around a table rolling dice with their friends and having some fun and laughs.
And if we've piqued your interests and you want to see what it's like, go ahead and check out some of our gameplay videos on our channel. It's me, Max, and our friends Nick and Tony playing Dungeons & Dragons.
And if you like what Ben and I had to say about the game and are interested in learning more, subscribe to PeakD&D.
Now, this is the first in our series of videos, the idea being that after you've watched all of them, you'll be in great shape to sit down at the table for your very first game of Dungeons & Dragons with some confidence.
You'll be familiar with the terms, the basics, the gist of the game, and have a good sense of how to make a character and what the hell all of this means. Hey, thanks for sticking around and hanging out with us today for our very first video.
Hopefully we piqued your interests
And gave you something to talk about or think about to elevate your game.
Let us know in the comments below if there's a particular aspect of the game you want us to talk about, or any funny stories you might have from your first D&D experience.
For more Peak D&D content, roll to hit that subscribe button, and make sure to drop all the warnings around the notification bell. That way you won't get skipped and miss your turn.
Now be sure to check back here for more Dungeons & Dragons content, like our next video teaching you how to make sense of your character sheet, and help the channel level up. Until then, keep on climbing, friends.
Catch you next time up here at the Peak.